Hello again. Okay, so here we're looking at estimating sex, arthroscopic analyses, and we're looking at the pelvic girdle and the innominate bones. You know what? One of the things that we would do is also look at the sacrum. That's included in our notes. We're not going to talk about that, but that is there as part of the assigned readings. As for the pelvic girdle, just a review. It's comprised of an innominate bone. Okay, so you have a left innominate bone, and then you have your right innominate bone, and then of course your sacrum, and that's in the center, and that equals a complete assembly when it's all articulated that we refer to as the pelvic girdle. Now the thing to remember about the pelvic girdle, this is great, giving us the greatest amount of accuracy. So we're looking at 96% to 100% accuracy. And the method that we are going to emphasize here is something that's referred to as the Phenice Method. And what we're going to find is that focuses on really actually a very small area of the pelvic girdle. The important thing about this is as we start to add in some of the other analyses, this really bolsters our ability to estimate the sex of the individual. And again, the pelvic girdle is the important area because it has everything to do with reproductive function and those dimorphic differences. Yeah, that's a backwards D. I don't know how that got there. I'll erase that. Those dimorphic differences that we see between, right? Obviously females and males. Okay, let's move along. Okay, so we're going to start off with refer back to the Harper Road woman, and one of the areas that I had discussed that allowed individuals to first claim that the individual is skeletally female. This is referred to as the greater sciatic notch. The greater sciatic notch, it's part of the innominate bone. So here we're seeing two examples of the innominate. Okay, so two examples of the innominate bone. And if you think back to the material when you're covering human osteology, at birth, the innominate bone is comprised of three different bones. And here we're looking at an area that's referred to as the ilium on that innominate bone. So I'm going to highlight the greater sciatic notch, and you can see where it aligns with that. There we go, right in. Oh, having some difficulties again, being a little bit fussy. Maybe the battery's starting to go. There is an example of the ilium and the greater sciatic notch, that portion of the ilium. So if I was to highlight it here, what we're looking at is roughly this area of our innominate bone. That's called the ilium, and then of course we have the ischium and the pubis bone. So here we're just looking at the ilium, that particular area. Looking at this area, we see a very clear difference between the two. So let's go ahead and label these A and B. We see a difference between that the greater sciatic notch, or the space that exists between these two parts of the ilium. So here we have kind of a very wide sciatic notch, and in contrast, if we go over to the individual on the right, we see a very narrow sciatic notch. A wide sciatic notch, this is characteristic of a female, whereas we're looking at a well-defined sciatic notch, that's characteristic of a male. So this is, generally speaking, one of the very first areas that I would look at. I take a look at that sciatic notch and see if it's large, very wide, or if it's about the size, when you look at the distance between the 2 points here, about the size of your thumb, that your thumb could fit in there easily. So that would be a very well-defined sciatic notch. And in that situation, we would see B is a great example of a male characteristically defined greater sciatic notch, whereas A, being very wide, is something that we find within females. And here we see a close-up of this. So we have that, right, that wide sciatic notch. When we have that wide feature, this is very characteristic of a female. And in the same way that we rated, for example, the mastoid process, we're also going to rate the greater sciatic notch. Now, if we move over and take a look at that male in a little closer. Okay, so here we see that well-defined sciatic notch. It's quite narrow. This is something that we find characteristically among males. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at the greater sciatic notch, and let's do an exercise together. I want you to take a look at the rating system that we have on the right-hand corner, and we are moving from number 1, which is a female, to number 5, which is a there we go, a male. Okay, 1 through 5. I'm going to label these innominate bones A, B, and of course C. And I'll give you a second to rate each of these as we go along. So as a reminder, you're looking at the area here highlighted in red for letter A. Go ahead and rate it on that scale from 1 to 5. Okay, let's do B. Take a look at that rating system again, and here we are right in that area. Take a look and give it a rating from 1 to 5. And let's move over to C, right there, and again, give it a rating. Okay, so my rating on this, A is clearly a number 5. If I look at B, that is a number 3, and C is a number 2. So it allows us to say, on first glance here, we're looking at number 5, and that is, I'm going to go into the top corner, that is a male. And C, because it's a 2, it's most consistent with a female. So I'm going to put a circle next to it. As for B, it's a number 3, so this is one of those areas where we really need, and in every situation we need more information, but here it demands a little bit more information. I can tell you by looking at this individual what I'm seeing on other features, and we'll talk about this in a second. I'm looking at the ischiopubic ramus right in this area, and that's wide. Okay, if I look at this, I can also see the entire ramus, so it's telling me that there isn't a subpubic concavity. So when I'm looking at number C, I don't see that ramus. It's tucked up inside. It's not visible because there is this subpubic concavity. So I know certainly, without doubt, by applying something called the Phenice method to help me with this, that C is definitely a female. When I look at B, it has features that are consistent with male. And if I move over to A, again, I'm seeing features right around here that are very consistent with a male. So now we're going to turn to that particular small little area that I'm talking about that's allowing me to go a little bit deeper and be more confident about my assessment and provide you with the support to explain that yes, we can be confident that A is most consistent with a male, and B is most consistent with a male, and C is most consistent with a female with the ultimate hope that you will give that back to me as well when you make your assessments. So let's move on and take a look at the Phenice method. All right, so the Phenice method here, we're looking at a very small area of the pubis. Okay, so the pubis bone, which forms part of the innominate bone, and an area that we refer to as a ramus, the ischiopubic ramus. Now, that's what I had referred to on the previous slide that we're looking at that allowed me to say fairly confidently that B was in fact a male. What I was looking at, and here if we look at the first image, right, and this one, okay, this square here, we're seeing this ischiopubic ramus, and here's how it's spelled. It'll pop up again. Don't worry if you can't see that very well. The ischiopubic ramus. In males, it's quite robust, and that's what I was able to see in that last image. In females, again, it's got that gracile or pinched type of feature. It's quite narrow. So again, we're looking at something being robust versus gracile. And again, that's kind of our guiding principle. If we move over the other feature in addition to the ischiopubic ramus, so there's three areas that we want to look at. Number one is that ischiopubic ramus. Number two, we're up here with the ventral arc. Okay, and I'll tell you more about that in a second. And then the third one is something referred to as the subpubic concavity. And I had mentioned that in the last slide as well. And I said because one of those innominate bones, C, had a subpubic concavity, that area, the ischiopubic ramus, was not visible. And if we look at this in its entirety, and here this is, I think is pretty interesting because when we're looking at the Phenice method, this is giving us 96 to 100% accuracy. I'm going to put that in red, and I'm going to put a couple asterisks next to it because it is important. It'll probably pop up on the test. The area that we're actually looking at, really that refers to, allows us to gain that type of analysis, it's just about this much of the human skeleton. It's not much at all. That's what, like 3 inches by 3 inches maximum. So I'm going to go into greater detail here to show you a few of these areas and explain it a little bit more beyond this introduction here. So let's start with the ventral arc because it's perhaps the most obvious. It's the ventral aspect of the innominate bone, and here we see it highlighted in blue. Okay, this is the pubis. Okay, all highlighted in blue. And the ventral aspect, and again, ventral, it's also another word for anterior, or in common language, front. So we're looking at the front of the pelvic girdle. We're looking at the front here of the innominate bone. So the steps, okay? So some of the things that we want to do, and again, come back to this if you want to record those steps. I'm going to move through it fairly quickly. What we want to do, number one, and if we were in class, we'd want to take that innominate bone or innominate bones, and we'd want to orient them in a way that we get an anterior view of it, or a ventral view of that pubis. After we've done that, we want to examine the inferior aspect of the pubis for an arc or ridge. So remember, inferior refers to down. It's lower, okay? And finally, we want to rate the level of detail, and we want to use a sex scoring sheet. All right, and here up in the top left corner, again, we have our orientation. So we're looking at the pubis, and as for the area that we're interested in, I said it was inferior, so we're looking just kind of in this region right there. I have to be honest with you, when I was doing forensic anthropology at school, I looked at it and said, what are you looking at? What are you seeing? I didn't quite see it. Now I do. So here, again, we have two innominate bones. Let's label them A and B. And like I said, we're looking at that pubis. So I'm going to go and highlight this for you. Okay, just to illustrate the pubis. Right about there. And it continues up to right about there. Okay, so that's the area that we're looking at. This ventral arc, it refers to the detail that we're seeing right in this region. Okay, so we're seeing some arcing, whereas in B, or on B here, in this region, we're not seeing any arcing. It's a very, if I use different words, it's a flat surface. And in contrast, if we look at A, we see some ridges or ridging, some arcing, right? I'll just erase that so you can see it a little bit better now that I've highlighted it. Right here, you see that? And right there. Whereas with respect to the male, we don't see those details. It's very flat. So B, again, classic example of a male textbook, whereas A, it's pretty close to being a textbook example of a female. I'd rate this probably around 2 to 3, in around there. Again, if we look at this a little bit closer to see that detail, okay, so like I said, Phenice, he's looking at this area. This is the pubis. As such. And the Phenice method asks us to look for these types of ridges that we find on this bone called the pubis. We're seeing it there, so definitely this is placing this individual into the female category. And we'll look at a rating system in a second. In contrast, here is our male. And I'm going to highlight that pubis. Okay, there we go. There's the pubis region, the pubis bone, which is now fused. And we're looking in that same area on the face, or the ventral aspect of the pubis. And I'm not seeing anything there. So I'm going to say with confidence, we're looking at a male. With respect to that ventral arc, we see some variation. And let's rate these 1, again, a highly feminized pubis. And I'll just go over here and indicate some of that arcing that we see. Number 2, we're still seeing some of that. Number 3, it's beginning to disappear. Number 4, it's a very flat surface. Number 5, it's gone entirely. So again, here's that type of arc. We can really see it well. Okay, so this ridge, it's producing an arc. Here, it's present a little bit. It's starting to disappear. Very, very small and nothing whatsoever. So 4 to 5, and 5 being consistent with a male. The subpubic concavity, we're still looking at the pubis, so I'll go and I'll highlight that pubis for us. Okay, in that region. But we're interested in the inferior aspect, so it means the lower, right? Inferior. We had pointed out that that means lower. The lower aspect of the pubis. And I've highlighted that with a circle, so this region on the left, or the right innominate bone. And just as a reminder, so while this portion highlighted in blue is our pubis, in green, I'm going to point out that that's our ischium, and I'll use red up here where we were looking for that greater sciatic notch. If you remember, that was called the ilium. Okay, so our three portions that make up the innominate bone: the pubis, the ischium, and the ilium, and they all fuse in adulthood. All right, so the steps, what we're interested in looking at. So we're interested in looking at the anterior surface of the innominate. Okay, I'm going to ask you to remember, I'm doing this on purpose, the ventral surface of the innominate, so the front of it. You can write that in there as well, just as a reminder. And what we want to do is observe the ramus of the pubic for a concave feature along its inferior border. Okay, so the ramus. Okay, so this is really another word for a section, okay, an elongated section of the pubis. Correct that. For a concave, okay, so a feature that's like a cave as such, along its inferior or lower border. So what that means is, again here, I've highlighted that in blue already. I'm just going to add, so if we say inferior, we're looking for something in this region. Okay, that's where we're interested in, looking for a concave feature around there. Females tend to have what Phenice referred to as a concavity. Males do not. Okay, so in simple terms, a concavity, it's just that. It's a cavity on the ramus, whereas males, they don't have that. It's straight. So again, a male feature, the lack of a concavity. Female has that little cavity. Let's take a look at a couple of examples. Okay, so here again we have the pubis, and I've highlighted the area that we're interested in if we look at the image in the top left corner. And I'll highlight this. Again, the pubis, so we know exactly where we are. Okay, so this is our pubis. And we said we're interested in an area that's just around, and remember that ventral arc. So there's that ventral arc. I'll say VA for the ventral arc. And right here, we're looking for that concavity. So what you're seeing here is that I'm having some difficulty with my pen. That's no surprise. All right, so there we go. Okay, we're seeing a slight little concavity. Now this is obviously much easier to do bone in hand. If we look at B, okay, so we have A, it has a presence of a concavity, and that is a female feature. If we look at B, it does not have that concavity, so I will highlight the pubis. And we're looking at this region right here, and I'm not seeing that for that concavity. It's straight. So we'll say concavity, not. It's not present, so a little squiggly, sometimes used for approximately. It's also a symbol for not. And we can say clearly we have a female, which is A, and B is consistent with a male. The ischiopubic ramus. So as I've pointed out, a ramus is a portion of bone. So it's the section between, and I'm just going to use my highlighting again, bear with me. So we said that this is our pubis. And I think I used green for the ischium. That's the portion that hurts after you've been riding a bicycle for a while. And then, of course, the ilium. I'll go ahead and label those for you. Review is always good. If I've got you here, why not? Ischium, and of course, the pubis. The ramus, it's a section of bone. Okay, so it's this length that we're seeing in between the ischium and the pubis. Now, what we're interested in doing are steps. Okay, so we need to view this from an anterior medial view. So ventral, front, medial, center. So that's where we're looking at the center area that we're just going to find here, and I'm going to sneak in here with a black area on the right innominate bone. So you're viewing it, it's on the left side of the screen. This is the medial aspect that I've highlighted in black, right in there. We can't see the medial on the left side or your right viewing side here because it's just not visible. So we want to orient the os coxa. Another tricky term, remember, os coxa. Innominate bone. Okay, so it's some different terms from time to time. So the anterior surface, or the ventral, the front, is visible. That's what we need. Now, we're going to, from a medial view, so we're just looking at the inside, as I've pointed out right around here, we want to observe the ridge that's inferior or lower to the pubis, and that's what we are interested here, is that ramus. And we want to rate it. Oh, we'll get rid of that writing now. We want to rate it as either sharp to flat, or robust to pinched. Okay, so sharp would be a pinched feature, or, well, flat, that's simple enough. Okay, and as I've already pointed out, and I'm not giving myself enough space here, females, they have that sharp or pinched feature, whereas males have a very flat pinched feature when we're looking at the ischiopubic ramus. Let's move on to the next slide and look at a couple of examples of the ischiopubic ramus. Okay, top left-hand corner, we have our orientation. We're seeing where the ramus is, and as I've already said, we can't see the medial aspect on that left innominate bone that's appearing on the right-hand side of your screen, right? So this is reversed. This is actually the left, and over here we have the right innominate bone. So if you imagine yourself turned around standing there, again, you can use your own body and anatomical position to orient it, and we do see the medial view from here. Okay, so this provides us with a medial view. And here I've oriented the innominate bones. We'll call this one A and B, in a way that we can see that medial aspect of the ramus. So I'll use green here just to kind of break off the ramus. That's the area we're interested in. And if we move over here to B, we can see the ramus. Now, what I clearly see here is a pinching. In contrast, B, it is a flat surface. So we have this kind of sharp ridge that's been produced in the ramus, pinched in. If you had this in your hand, you would actually feel it. It would feel almost like this was Play-Doh at one point of time, or clay, and somebody just kind of grabbed it and pinched it in with their fingers. In contrast, B, it's a very flat surface. Okay, so again, the presence here of this ischiopubic ramus, we're a little bit closer so we could see a little bit better. The ramus, I'll use green again because I started off that way. Again, this area, that's the ramus, that length of bone. And now we're looking for, it's there, it's a pinched in feature. So when we see this pinched, that pinched ischiopubic ramus, that equals a female characteristic. Let's move over and take a look at the male a little bit closer. Okay, so here again, if you're looking at it, you're probably already doing it. There is the ramus, and the area that we're interested in is in between. And just again to help you orient, this is what we refer to as the pubic symphysis. That's the point. I'm going to highlight it in the left image, black. That's what we find right there, the medial view on either side. And here, looking at this, I'm seeing a very wide, flat surface. So it's flat and wide. So that ischiopubic ramus, this one gives us a good indication of a male. Okay, so we're going to move on and we're going to do the same thing that we did with the skull. We're going to take a look at a sample and we're going to go through it and rate it and see what we come up with. Okay, so here we see that angle that we're interested in, and up at the top diagram, we have an individual where there is clearly a subpubic concavity. And again, I'm just going to sketch that in here with, I don't know, use green, right? We see that cavity being formed within this area. And it's creating a different angle than what we see on the individual below. And here we go. Okay, so right in between there, we have this subpubic concavity, and on the other individual, we don't. We have a little bit because we're always going to expect that we're not identical in our bodies. But either way, we have a very different angle being produced. So if I was to go and say, you know, ultimately, what are we seeing here? We're seeing something that is very much curved. We have that curved appearance, and in contrast, we really don't have a curved appearance in here. It has that triangular feature. Before we move on, sorry, I just want to look at one more area. This is called the subpubic arch. And what it refers to is when we have two innominate bones articulated. So what we're thinking of here is this area. I've already referred to it as the pubic symphysis. Okay, this is pubic symphysis. This is this area that articulates or attaches to the other innominate bone. And I'll just go through our bones here so we can, again, orient it. Okay, so green we had used for the pubic bone. Okay, so there's the pubic portion. And that's what we're concerned with. And if we just wanted to highlight this, again, here's our, well, that's not really coming across as blue, is it? I guess blue and yellowish make green, so I'm going to use a different color. I'll go to here. That's better. This represents our ischium, that part that gets sore when we're riding a bicycle, and of course our ilium in red. And as I pointed out a couple times, these are all fused by adulthood. Now, what we're interested in is an area or an arch that's formed when two of the innominate bones are together. So we only have one innominate bone here, and you might be thinking, well, how do we determine that? Well, we could just flip it over and trace its outline because they're really going to be very similar in appearance. And here I'm just going to kind of sketch it in the way it would look if we did flip it over. It's going to have this type of appearance. So here's our other pubic symphysis if we did have it. We need to remember in archaeological and bioarchaeological and forensic cases, we don't always have all of the remains. What we're seeing here is a rounded feature in that arch, okay? Now, if we reflect on the male, and I'm going to go over to the male in a second, we're going to see a very different type of angle. So we have type of a circular angle. I would refer to that as an arch, and one of the ways of thinking of it is it has that circular shape for the symbol that we use for female. So just as a way to remind ourselves what we're looking for. So the subpubic arch, we're going to see a different type of angle here when we look at the way the two innominate bones articulate. Okay, so if we look at this other innominate bone and we imagine that we have a second innominate bone, which is going to be as such, it's going to follow the same lines as the original. Okay, and I'll draw on that obiter foramen as well, that hole that we see there, the obiter foramen. We have a very different angle from the previous innominate bones. What we're seeing here is a triangular angle or arch. And as a reminder, think about the symbol that we use in anthropology for male. I'll just complete that. A triangle. So that triangular shape, when we're looking at that subpubic arch, the triangular shape equals male, and when we see more of a rounded feature, that equals female, which is consistent with those symbols that we've already used, the triangle versus the circle. Okay, now we can go on and we can apply what we know and estimate ancestry, not ancestry, I apologize, estimate sex from the innominate bones. All right, let's go ahead and rate this innominate bone. So let's start off with the greater sciatic notch. As pointed out, we're in this area of the ilium, and that's a well-defined notch. I'm going to rate that as a 5. Okay, so we can see a few things from here. I'm going to progress to the next slide, and we could perhaps get a better idea. But if we're looking for that, the subpubic concavity and the ischiopubic ramus, again, here's the area that we're looking for, and I think it's kind of a giveaway at this point. Let's move to the next slide nonetheless. Okay, we had a 5. I'm going to rescore that. And like I said, I was ready to, and I am. I'm ready to throw in the towel on this one. I'm fairly certain of what I'm seeing, and that's because I did get a glimpse on the last view. It allowed me enough to see a couple of these components that are associated with the Phenice method. So the ventral arc, the subpubic concavity, and 3, the ischiopubic ramus, as we pointed out. Those are the areas that are associated with the Phenice method. Okay, and I'm going to score a couple more things here. So I'm looking at the ventral arc. I'm nonetheless going to do this because we always need to support ourselves. I'm looking at the ventral arc. I'm not seeing its presence, so I'm going to rate it as a 5. Now I'm going to jump down here because I do see the subpubic arch, and that's going to allow me to also comment on the subpubic concavity. So if I conclude or create the angle that I'm seeing here, okay. Oh, and I lost it. There we go. If we complete that angle, what I'm seeing is a very triangular feature. Okay, so I'm looking at that subpubic arch. I'm going to rate it as a 4. The reason why I'm rating it as a 4 is because I do see a slight little arch here, tiny bit. Okay, so when it comes to that subpubic concavity, I'm not going to say it's a 5. It's definitely not a 5. It's more in around that 4 level. So we have 5, 5, 4, 4. Let's move on to the last area where we're just going to need to look at it immediately to comment on the ischiopubic ramus. Okay, so that ischiopubic ramus, we have a medial view of our innominate bone, and I'm not seeing any pinching here. Okay, if I was to describe it, I'd call it a very flat. It's a wide surface, and that's going to be consistent with a male, and I'm confident placing it at a 5. on this. So when I'm looking at a score out of 25, I have 23. My math is correct there. Sure, that looks good. I have a 23. I'm a little bit lower on the subpubic concavity and on the subpubic arch. However, that's giving me a very high degree of certainty that this individual is, and you should be concluding the same thing I am at this point of time, a male. So my level of confidence when I say 23 out of 25, that's what, about 92%. I'm 92% certain that I am within that 95 to 100% accuracy. And I am confident looking at this innominate bone and defining it as male or consistent. We'll use a short form. It's consistent with the male sex. And this is ultimately what we want to see, but I want those explanations. So when you're doing your project, just don't tell me that there's a flat, wide surface that's consistent with the Phenice method. Take a shot. I've given you images and show me what you're looking at. That's really what I want to see. So if you're talking about the Phenice method and you're analyzing this, and again, you're looking at that ischiopubic ramus, you can do this. Exactly what I've done, and this is good support. And underneath them, you might put a little bit of caption as you're talking about it, but now I know that you know what you're talking about, and here we might do the same for the sciatic notch. We could label that. We'll call it the greater sciatic notch, and you might give me an example of that, and even perhaps some of those the scales that we saw, where it started to become smaller and smaller and ultimately smaller, and you're going to compare it to this one. Well, like I said, it's about a 5. But I always want to see some support for the conclusions that you're making, even if the conclusion is we cannot be certain about the individual's sex. It's indeterminate because we might have a different score here that only leads us to a 50% certainty, and we don't have anything else to fall back on. But in the end, when we take a look at the skull and we take a look at the pelvic girdle, we should be very confident about the individual that we're looking at. And that's going to be important for any forensic anthropology or bioarchaeology, because it allows us to comment on the past and help reconstruct not only life, but the events that perhaps surround this individual. Okay, that's where we're going to leave it. I'll see you next time. Take care.